in this house, the most dire, horrible events took place.
We are not content with the stories. Somebody's lives come. Be my victim.
Through watching scenes of violence, through watching scenes of transgression, through watching scenes of horror. There's an enormous amount of sort of abattoir of excess.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
You know, I do have plans to change that, do an update. I'm still obsessed with Rod Serling. There is a Twilight Zone remake in the works, but gosh darn it, I love that intro.
Never change it.
I can't make myself do it. I
No,
can't.
never change it. It's my favourite. I love it.
Now that I've stopped getting copyright claimed on it every single time for the 3 frames of Dead of Night that are in there. Oh, that was fun. That was fun. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 99 of Double Feature Horror Show. It is episode 99, but there has been no flaking. I've got some fantastic guests for you this week and a wonderful theme. I've been wanting to cover this for a while. You may know in the back catalogue, there is a very rare episode by episode review of this series that I did. But we're going to have a little more focus on Midnight Mass this time, a little more of a specific way of looking at it, because we have a special theme this month. It is Christian Perspectives on Horror. And, well, it was a tough call. We could have gone with Knock Knock, but, you know, you do actually want to get guests on. So, we're covering Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass. And as this concerns spooky happenings in the Catholic Church on a remote island, I figure we should probably have someone from the faith to actually give it a fair hearing. Some would say that it doesn't get one in this show. We'll find out. Who else was going to call on? Hi, Connor. How are you doing?
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I thought I'd keep Harry's seat warm after he's come on so many times. I felt challenged, so cheers. Appreciate it.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I had you in mind ever since a random segue that you did way back in one of the Lotus Eaters podcasts, where you just veered off into a very cogent, detailed discussion of the Halloween series. I thought,
I think I don't know if that was the Dharma podcast, or I can't remember what it was. No, something to do with Jamie Lee Curtis. It must have been a clip from something. It might have been the Silence of the Lambs discussion. I'm trying to remember now, but yeah, no, I've always loved the late 70s to 80s slasher genre in particular. Obviously the big three with Voorhees and Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers. One of my hot takes is probably that my favorite of those might be Friday the 13th Part 7, because even though it's a massive rip-off of Carrie, it is quite enjoyable. But yeah, no, I've always enjoyed that sort of stuff. I've always been a secret nerd. I mean, obviously cameras aren't on now, but what some people might not know, unless they watch the most recent Comics Corner, is that I have my own library of comic books. So I may not be the most assuming nerd, but definitely so.
yeah,
Very
don't worry.
nice.
And chat, be assured, Connor has popped the camera on. There are no Funko Pops. Do not worry. This man is purely focused on the actual material.
There is one, but in my defense,
hang on.
in my defense, I was bought it by an ex-girlfriend about 5 years ago, and it was Oryx from Destiny. So I was like, you know what, I'll keep that one just because I remember the days when Destiny used to be good.
Well, for a fun segue, and very interesting that you mentioned Friday the 13th. That is actually what TCG and I bonded over. However,
Yes.
he doesn't get to escape it because he has to be introduced properly, as he is every week. It's what he looks forward to most in every show. That's right. He's a tough guy. I like it really rough guy. I just can't get enough guy. That's always so puffed guy. It's that crime guy.
Duh.
Am I being shamed for my music taste again?
It was a bit of a segue. I was introducing TCG with select rap lyrics, the ones I'm allowed to say on YouTube, and then we were there were complaints of a sort of Evolian phenomenon occurring in the channel, so I switched it onto terrible UK garage from the early 2000s, and then there were complaints about earworms. So I can't think what drove me to go with the song this week. It slips my mind.
I mean, I can think of two reasons, but we'll leave it there, shall we?
So how's it going, TCG? What do you reckon? Friday the 13th, part 7?
Well, part 4, but I tell you what, Rashford, baby, has just put United 1-0 up against Betis. Sunday against Liverpool, never happened. What are you talking about? Part 4 is my favourite. It's the absolute best. You've got a bit of Crispin Glover in it. You got some really interesting death scenes. You've also got Lion, I think is the name of the band. When Crispin Glover does that iconic dance scene, you've got the computer as well. It's just the best. It is hands down the best Friday the 13th.
Respectable choice. I'd put it third after 6 because Tommy Jarvis in 6 is unparalleled levels of bad backsidery.
Yeah.
Although I will say my favorite death of the entire Friday the 13th series, I believe, was part 3 with the guy in the wheelchair.
I think that might have been part 2.
Part 2,
perhaps,
yeah. That's it, yeah.
Stairs, yeah.
Oh, he just gets the old machete in the head and pushed down the flight the stairs.
My one's still the paintball one, where it goes smack bang into the tree and it somehow leaves a smiley face and makes 0
Oh
sense.
yeah.
Yeah. It may sound like heresy, but Friday the 13th, there's a series that discovered itself, It didn't need to go to Thailand. It just needed to have about 3 really kind of shoddy episodes before it worked out what it wanted to do, how it wanted to look.
Sounds
To be
like
fair, it didn't need to go to Manhattan either, but it did go to space.
Yeah, he didn't need to box a black guy in a boat.
That guy was the best one. They did him so dirty. He was the best character in that film. He had a whole arc and everything.
He did, yeah, he did.
Well, whenever we have a first-time guest, we have to ask about their background in horror. Occasionally, we have to let the cat out. So, Connor, do you want to just give us a few minutes about how you got into horror, what some of your favourites are?
Oh, I would probably say that the first horror series I watched in total was Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's because my aunt bought the box set when I was younger, and I was always really curious about Freddy Krueger being on the front. So I binged them when I was about 11, and then I also ended up watching some films which were probably not age appropriate at the time as well, but I ended up watching all the Alien films, all the Terminator films, and Sin City. So it sort of set my taste palette for gore, violence, and hyper stylism. And then I spent a lot of time binging the Halloween series because I loved the score and cinematography in the first 2, and then that falls off a cliff. One of the great wasted potentials, I think, is the end of Halloween Part 4. But then we can blame Dominic Odin and Gerard for number 5, because that man took so many liberties with retconning and binning off the protagonist from the first one just because he wanted a female protagonist that had brunette hair. So he just killed off the blonde in the first 10 minutes, even though she was very well developed. But there we go. I've always liked the filmmaking aspects that go into horror more so than quite a few other genres, especially the fact that a lot of modern filmmaking is all CGI based. Because before I wanted to write, and well before I wanted to go into politics, because I'm more of a literature guy, that's what I studied at university, I wanted to be a director for quite a while, and it was mainly because I saw things like Hellboy 2, and I would obsessively watch the behind the scenes on the second disc, and how the fact that other than about 4 different creatures in that movie, everything's practical effects. And I was wowed by how pulled in I was to the grotesque creatures of that world, but the fact that everything was done with love and care and was a tangible thing that existed rather than something that was made up on a computer. So I've always appreciated how horror, for good or for ill, for some of the cheesier parts, like when Freddy Krueger kills someone with a Nintendo 64 glove, really pushes the envelope in terms of what can be shown on screen and innovativeness. And so that was back when I wasn't so sick of working with actors back in my theatre days. Horror was definitely a part of why I wanted to get into film and from the technical and the front of the camera side.
Yeah, something we've said on the channel a fair amount is that the fact that horror can be, when you boil it down, so predictable actually leaves you a huge scope for creativity. And we often say it's kind of like a martini, an old-fashioned, maybe an espresso martini, where it's like the ingredients are very standard. So it really is about how you present it. That makes all the difference. You can stand out by doing something amazing with the same basic ingredients.
One of the best subversive horrors I've seen recently, and this will be a tease for anyone who is subscribed to LotusEaters.com. If you're not, it's $5 a month. Come on, we're better than Netflix, who we're about to discuss, obviously. We are, for our 5th episode of Comics Corner, Harry and I are taking a break from DC for a few episodes, and we are covering the Easter Rail 177 trilogy, which is Unbreakable, Split, and Glass. Some of my favourite films of all time.
Ooh.
And
Yes.
Split does an incredible job of inverting the horror dynamic, because it takes the women who are what M. Night Shyamalan called pure or chaste or wholesome, and makes them the victims rather than the ones who are sleeping around and the most lewd. And the final girl is the one most like the main villain, and that's why you get that resolution at the end where the villain isn't killed off, but instead they sympathize and reconcile, and it sets up the sequel. And I think that was just a very clever iteration of a predictable formula that produced a very good film.
Yes. Yeah, I love those films. I love those films. Can I also just interject and just quickly say that I really appreciate when you were sort of listing off your horror films that you mentioned the Terminator, because I remember we had a bit of a debate when we first started doing these streams as to whether the Terminator was actually a horror film or not, and I've always maintained that it was. So it's really nice to know.
The first one definitely is much like Alien,
Yes.
and then much like the Alien franchise, the second one was even better because it wasn't horror; it was an action movie. And I'm not saying like action movies are superior to horror movies, but the way the story structure lent itself slightly better. Especially because I mean, Aliens isn't a horror movie at all; it's just a Vietnam War movie, and it's brilliant.
Yes.
Oh, you said that as well, haven't you, Horrorshow?
Yeah, I've made that point.
Yeah.
Well, I also said Nightmare on Elm Street is a Vietnam horror movie, so I'm kind of like Michel Foucault, just saying everything's a prison, aren't I? But gosh darn it, I'm going to slap that button each time. There's so many places we could take it. I feel often horror as a genre kind of leaks. You know, lots of other genres will try and get a little bit of it. If you remember early in the 2000s, you had so many thrillers, and this is probably a hangover from Silence of the Lambs, but so many thrillers decided they wanted to go straight into the horror area. They wanted to really push you into fear mode in a way that they hadn't done before. And to me, it felt like the horror genre was just leaking out.
You've seen that with superhero movies recently as well, because obviously The Dark Knight tried bits of it. Doctor Strange 2 apparently tried bits of it, but all I saw was a CGI mess and poorly written dialogue. And then someone who I defend plenty, and I'm sure this will polarize the audience, Zack Snyder based a hell of a lot of Batman scenes, Batman v Superman, on the way that certain horror tropes would go, and I think it made it a very effective portrayal of how the police would view Batman as kind of an urban legend, particularly when he's going too far. There's that bit in where he's introduced for the first time with all of the Asian sex slaves locked in the basement, and they voluntarily lock themselves in, pull the door shut, and the police are trying to free them because they're so afraid of him, and he's hanging in the corner. You don't see him at the corner of the screen, and he scuttles along and just disappears into the darkness. And that's so clearly a shot from a horror film. You could have repurposed it for anything else. Giving it to Batman was a great idea, ripped straight from the Doug mentioned Kelly Jones era, where he had those really long exaggerated ears and all the villains were really grotesque and mangled.
There's a lot a lot of potential in that crossover, and it's relatively underexplored. I mean, what was that recent X-Men universe thing where they try to lean on the horror a bit?
New Mutants, yes.
Yeah, there we go.
So New Mutants was a frustrating one because you could tell it was probably about 3 hours and they cut it in half. And also Anya Taylor-Joy and Maisie Williams were piggybacking the entire production. But there were elements of that that were visually very interesting. It's just you kind of felt blue-balled about the fact they didn't explain most of the horror elements.
Yeah. I haven't risked it myself. I saw the reviews and I wasn't fancying it, but
it's fine for a one watch. But then again, I kind of defend Dark Phoenix a little bit, so maybe my taste isn't to be taken as gospel.
I'll say nothing on that front. Oh, you bring up wonderful memories of it's James Gunn's Super.
Oh God, James Gunn. Yeah. As a gigantic DC fan who thinks that James Gunn has only done anything good that is Scooby-Doo, I am very disheartened by the new DC slate. I don't know if you've seen it, but
No.
Okay, so they're rebooting Superman with Superman Legacy or something like that. They're doing a new Batman movie, but with a brand new Batman. So another one with Damian Wayne, the least enjoyable Robin. They're doing Supergirl. They're doing Green Lantern Corps, which is meant to be like True Detective in Space, which sounds interesting until I don't trust who's doing it. They're doing Black Superman, and then one of the great ones they're doing, which I'd love, is Swamp Thing if handled competently, because Swamp Thing's probably my favorite comics character of all time. But do I entrust someone to do a intelligible horror movie using that character in current day? No. So
what do you think the barriers are to that?
Sadly, I think it's ideology, frankly. I mean, so the recent Swamp Thing run has been taken over by Ram V, and Ram V decided to get rid of Alec Holland, who was the long-standing Swamp Thing in the comics from all the way back from Whedon and Wrightson's run in the 70s, which was based on gothic horror. I don't know if you've ever read the Swamp Thing run, but I think you'd really enjoy it, because it started out in House of Secrets as a 19th century tale about a jealous lover who killed off his rival and remarried the woman, and the guy came back as a vengeance spirit of the swamp because his body was dumped there, and he strangles his rival, but because he can't speak as he's a giant swamp monster, he just terrifies his ex-wife and just leaves off into the night. And the final line are, if tears could come they would, and that keeps being repeated throughout the Swamp Thing run, which is very nice. Some of the later issues when it was readapted into Alec Holland were things like the aliens had landed, and there was an antebellum South ghost story. His main arch nemesis was Anton Arcane, who's a man that wanted to be so immortal so badly that he would create Frankensteinian monsters and repossess his soul in it, and so he became the avatar of death for a while. But really interesting horror ideas. Alan Moore took it a step further and made it from body horror to a kind of existential horror, because it went from Alec Holland being turned into a swamp monster to you were never Alec Holland, you were just a plant that thought it was a man. And so there was that self-redefinition aspect that you needed to get to. He went through hell, all sorts of it. So some really complex ideas there. Ram V instead got rid of Alec Holland and made him a Indian man that was in touch with the Hindu gods for basically no reason. And the art was lovely, but it was clear that he just wanted to swap it out because I'm a brown man and I got a job because I'm brown and therefore make a brown character. And
The old Velma.
yeah. And so I don't trust they're not going to do that with Alec Holland either. And I know the kind of people that James Gunn picks as well to direct films, because I know his filmmaking style. It's irreverent and campy. And do I entrust his type of horror? I mean, I remember when James Wong said that he was going to make Aquaman a horror movie, and we got about 5 minutes of that with a trench, and the rest was Pitbull singing Africa.
I haven't had the pleasure, and something tells me that I will. I never will have the pleasure of that. Alas.
Aquaman's a fun drunk movie, except for Amber Heard, which does kind of ruin it.
Always. I'm looking at the time and thinking, gosh, stop being interesting.
Sorry.
Stop being interesting. We're going to shill because we're on YouTube, and then we'll get swiftly into our topic, and then we'll get into a very meaty discussion. So, folks, we're on YouTube. You know how it goes on here. You can smash that like, you can stake that like, you can pounce upon that like and subscribe button, and you can rip its neck out. Trust me, it'll be fine in about 6 hours. Don't worry about it. It'll be a good cliffhanger. Anything you want to do to support the channel is welcome. There's also super chats. some of which goes to the Susan's replacement, but don't worry about that. If you want to keep your conscience and wallet clean, then you can support the channel via Subscribestar as well, and that all gets you access to early releases and exclusive content. That is all the shilling I'm comfortable doing. You know how it is. I'm far too English. And I'll hand it over to my guests now to do their own shilling. Connor, you got a sneaky one in so you can follow up. TCG, how about yourself?
Not much for me this week. I did a live reading over on the main channel on Monday. Was it Monday? Yeah, Monday. That if you guys want to go and check that out, it was a book, True Crime UK, that my wife got me for Christmas, and we read chapter 12 of that one. It was an interesting read, shall we say? One that, after I finished the stream, I turned off monetization because there was no hope in hell that the review would be successful after it went yellow. So I just turned it off. So go and check that out. I am also fortunate now that my work load has eased off a little bit. So I'm hoping to get the script finished for my upcoming video tonight. And I'm aiming to get that out for this weekend. It's a good old-fashioned Ripper story, which is a bit recent. Less Ripper. Or is it? Tune in, find out.
We will. And how about yourself, Connor?
Yeah, you can find pretty much all of my work over at lotuseaters.com these days, or I occasionally go on mainstream telly and chat nonsense on GB News and Talk TV, so you can find the clips put out or announcements when I'm going on there. My Twitter at @con_Tomlinson. We've got plenty of content coming out today. We had a symposium with Stelios, who's the latest Lotus Eaters colleague, who does a philosophy series. I made my debut on his show, and we chatted about love for 2 hours, and it's one of the best pieces of content I think I've done since I've started there almost a year ago now. So go and check that out. It's less than $5 a month, and if your appetite isn't wet, then you get about half an hour for free on any video that you want to go and look at. So make sure to go and sample.
Very nicely done. I always think it's going to be a wonderful podcast when it's a Connor and Harry double team.
We unfortunately, just because of the schedule, how it's lined up, we haven't had as many. But we did do the analytics, and I don't want to brag, but for a couple of months there, Harry and I were the highest viewing team on the channel. So, you know, we do have a bit of fun together. You know, it is also just to not tease him. He's genuinely one of my best friends off there. I've had a rough couple of months, and Harry is one of the gentlemen in the office who has actually really been there for me. So he's a really lovely guy, both on and off the show.
Can confirm. And also don't be shy about boasting. Harry was on here. He was boasting how he always won the office spin the bottle. So don't worry. It's all fine.
Yeah, he got to snog Rory. So that's
Whee.
I had that saved up for the next time he was coming on. You know, here's Harry, a man who told us every Friday at Lotus Eaters finishes with spin the bottle. But we'd never get him back on if we did that. So
Harry and I once did an arm wrestle and got a stalemate. So we truly are soulmates.
Gosh, I did wonder. All right, well, moving on to our topic section. It will be quick, and it will actually be quick for once. Partly because Connor, you surprised me. Maybe it's just me being old. You said you hadn't seen the Scream series.
Yeah, I haven't got round to it. That's just the reason. Also, I don't think it. Well, I wouldn't presume a lady's age, but everyone thinks I'm older than I am as well. So might be that. Don't know.
Well, given that I went grey when I was 13, you know, it's that presumption of age has been very helpful in when they're so quick to ID you these days. I assure you. So we will not expect prophetic predictions from you, but TCG. I've got my ticket booked. I can't speak tonight. I've got my ticket booked. I'll be in there tomorrow watching the 3 p.m. screening. I guarantee you a dodgy-looking guy in a tracksuit with a large sports bag will come in about a minute before the screening starts and go straight to the back row and make sure you can get your screen rip copy of the movie. This has happened the last 2 times I've gone and seen a Friday release.
Yeah, your head was in the way when I recorded that. So can you just make sure that I'll tell you what, if you do it again, I'll sort of tap you on the shoulder and I'll just say, look, can you just sort of tilt your head a little bit to
courtesy
the right.
tap. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So
yeah.
you two are to blame for the reason that Harry and I had to go see Wakanda Forever in the cinema to review it, rather than just get it from totally legitimate websites. Understood?
That's it.
I
Yep.
still can't believe you sat through that. Like,
I can't.
My
I can't do that.
fanfic is there was a fight. Like, you see it. No, you see it. No, please. It's nearly 3 hours. You can't make me.
Was that what the arm wrestle was about?
I can't remember. I actually can't remember what the arm wrestle was about now. But no, it wasn't. It wasn't that. It was. Yeah, it was horrendous though. Unfortunately, I had to leave 10 minutes before the end because I had to get my last train. So they had to endure the nonsensical ending.
Yeah, you're braver than I am. All right. So TCG, did you have any predictions for this? This is just, we're going to see how we do next week. We'll be celebrating 100% correct predictions like last time.
I mean, my Scream 5 prediction was so on point, wasn't it? I mean, it's not as if there's any evidence online of that at all. I don't know. I mean, I'm always going to say Stu's alive and Stu comes back. I mean, given what the Scream franchise is, I'm wondering how long it's going to get until it goes supernatural. So who knows? I don't think Scream 6 will be that one though.
They're baiting it.
Yeah, they are baiting it, but I don't think it's going to go down that route. It will focus heavy on the new breed, on the new characters. I do think that maybe somebody is going to get ganked from the original cast. I mean, yeah, I don't. I mean, because obviously, you know, I don't want to spoil it because Connor hasn't seen any of them yet. But I do think one of the two original ones that are still in it are going to go, and I think it's more than likely Courtney Cox's character, because I don't even think Neve Campbell's in it this time around.
That was one thing I was specifically going to ask you about, because I think there's a bit of kayfabe. There was Connor, for your benefit, one of the, like, I guess the figurehead of Scream was in the last one. It was a big sort of, all the legacy characters come back, but then there was big publicity over she's out, she's not back for this one. They didn't pay her enough. Can you believe a woman not paid enough, Connor? Can you believe it? I think it's kayfabe. And I get, maybe I'm going to be laughed at, but I think it is a plot line. It's one of the ways that they will excite the audience. And so the storyline is that this actress isn't in it, but she will, in fact, be back for a cameo, probably at the end.
I don't think she will. I don't think Sydney's going to be in it. And to be honest, I don't even think Courtney Cox should be in it. What I would have liked is I would have liked a fresh start, clean slate, and go with these characters and let them take center stage. Because I feel like with the last one, and don't get me wrong, obviously having the legacy characters in it was good because you want to create that connection. But that should have been their passing the torch moment, and because you've got a really interesting story with Sam Carpenter. I think is her name. You know, you've got an interesting sort of story there, like, you know, given her biological father and the sort of like the mental health conditions that she's got off the back of it. I think it's destined that she's going to be a ghost face. But again, I don't think it'll be this one. I think they'll save that for Scream 7. I do.
Yeah. I'm worried about how they'll work it. It's an angle. It's a fresh angle. I just hope they can do something interesting. But yeah, fair enough. Well, tell you what, I'll put my cards on the table. I think we do have a large cast of characters there, but which does make it a little hard. If we're playing by the actual Justice Warrior rules, then we have 2 white guys here who are very acceptable targets. I don't think they're going to play that card though, but we'll see. I'm also with you that I think both the legacy characters are going here. We have Kirby here, who is down on the second from the bottom on the right. And
there she is, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're both going. I think they do want to do the clean slate, and they're working towards it. And if I'm going to take a bit of a gamble, I'm going to say that I'm going to be so wrong on this, but I think there's a chance that Gale is the first one to go in the opening scene,
I mean,
and
it's
that the
possible.
trailers have been faked.
I mean,
She's been inserted
yeah,
into the back.
got
But
ya.
I could be very wrong.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, they did it with Cotton Weary in Scream 3.
True.
So, I wouldn't rule that out. And bearing in mind, it's Scream 6, divisible by 3, it's potential.
We're into numerology for our guessing.
It's complete. But I mean, it's a solid prediction. I think it could happen. I mean, when they took out Dewey in the last one, I think it just it literally made everybody fair game.
It was the right decision, even though we can quibble how it was done.
Yeah, I mean,
something else we can. Oh, sorry, mate. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say. I mean, he got an honourable. Well, I say he got an honourable death, but I mean, yeah, obviously the mechanics behind it was somewhat questionable, but the intention was there, I think. But yeah, I think it's gonna be. I think Gale's definitely gonna go, and I almost would like it to be the opening kill.
It would have power. The second you see her there, you know what that means.
Exactly, yeah. Although, mind you, we thought that with the last one, General Ortega's character. It was the first time they...
True.
It's difficult, man. It is really difficult.
All right. I'll throw something else out there. What we have here is something that was in the trailer, not a massive spoiler. It's obviously filled to the brim with well-known props and items from the series. What we're looking at here is something like a superfan shrine. And this is full of cool Easter eggs, but, you find yourself picking little things out there and thinking, oh, what was that from? What was that from? My worry is what this means is that we are once again going to the well of the messages about the fans. And I'm like some kind of purists versus modernizers, and I think that is possibly going to be messy as heck.
So it's almost like the Flash Museum, isn't it, Connor?
Yeah, I was about to say. So the recent storyline with I think was it Joshua Williamson that did it, but when Barry got brought back as Flash, and everyone was complaining about Wally's erasure in before Rebirth and then after Rebirth with Heroes in Crisis, there was this gigantic villain that was created that was like a Wally West superfan and was trying to kill Barry Allen because he was saying he wasn't the real Flash. You weren't around in the 90s. You should have stayed dead. And it was meant to be reaching through the screen and punching the fans in the face, saying, stop whining. Yes, we character assassinated your favorite Flash multiple times. Deal with it. And they wonder why people drop book.
That's got some Mark Miller energy.
Yeah, and Mark Waid, unfortunately, and all these sorts of people. We'll be covering Mark Miller on Comics Corner very soon as well. He's an unbearable nihilist.
Is that... Sorry. Mark Miller is the kick-ass guy, right?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
Okay.
He also wrote Logan. Old Man Logan, rather.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, we have some predictions out there, as I say. Yeah, we're both saying Gale's gone. I think Kirby's gone, and I have a kind of strong suspicion Kirby is going to be the killer. 50-50 odds on that one. And a big worry that they are going to try and address fandom again. Let's just say, without going over old territory, the topic of fandom was very confused in the last one. They didn't seem to know what they were going to say, and there wasn't really a coherent interpretation of it. So they would be very advised to not touch that topic.
I wish someone would have told the director of the Halloween trilogy that as well.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Never follow your faves on Twitter. Except Tony Todd. He posted about his cat and his daughter's getting married. Tony Todd. A hero. A gentleman.
He's a lovely lad.
He is. All right. There we go. We got our predictions, and we will know tomorrow how right I am. I'm going to be doing an emergency stream on this on Saturday. It's the closest I get to the quartering. But that'll just be an hour long with a sort of spoiler-free section. And then I'll talk a bit in spoilers for the last 40 minutes. So that'll just be nice and light on Saturday. But with that all done, we want a nice, efficient stream. And we can go on to talking about Midnight Mass. If I can find the right screenshot which is a lot harder than you would think. I'm still looking, guys. Help me out.
Have you tried the file below?
Have you tried turning it off and on again?
Yeah.
Oh, it's telling me I've got a virus. Oh man, no, we're all good, folks. We're all good. Oh, there it was. Wouldn't you know? It's in the last place you look. Okay. Just a quick opener. Connor, what's your familiarity with Mike Flanagan, who's the guy behind this?
Relatively none, because I haven't seen. I know he did Haunting of Bly Manor and Haunting on Hill House. Despite those being well recommended, I haven't had time to watch them yet. But coming into this relatively blind, I like his visual style very much, and I enjoyed this far more than I expected of a current day Netflix series, despite some criticisms I will have of the latter half of episode 6 and of episode 7.
I think that's pretty fair. You know, some would say that as a guy who is frequently compared to, how can I say, frequently associated with Stephen King, you know, one of his best adapters, bungling the ending consistently is the best tribute you could make to the guy.
That's pretty spot on. Same with Scott Snyder, who's the Batman writer who was best friends with Stephen King's son and got Stephen King to write the first few issues of American Vampire. He started off his Batman run very strong, again with horror elements, and then by the end it was a wet fart.
Classic. Richard, tell you what, I will take a bet on that. I think there's a decent chance they will drop it. They will drop some current lingo. Toxic,
I can't say that word. That's our word.
Yeah, that's fair enough. TCG, you've seen a few of these, so
yeah. I mean, only from what we've covered previously on the channel, Haunting on Hill House and Haunting of Bly Manor. So I was kind of knowing what to expect going into this, like Connor said, with like the visual style and some of the things that he does. I was very curious though as to whether there was going to be anything sort of like sneaking around in the background that was in the previous 2 series. So I felt like I spent most of my time watching the peripheral around sort of what was going on around the characters as opposed to watching the characters directly. So
yeah.
I might
Since you said that, I was looking here so much. I was like, I thought they'd put something in there. Sorry, Connor, that will make no sense. But it, in both the Haunting series, there are hidden ghosts who are just in the background, saying nothing, doing nothing, and it's a sort of a bonus that you can spot.
I really like that sort of thing, because one of my main irritants in horror is the egregious over-reliance of jump scares recently, and it didn't ruin an otherwise good film for me, but I enjoyed most of Last Night in Soho, not just because Anya Taylor-Joy is unbelievably attractive, but when it got to the weird faceless men, they overused the CGI ghosts so much that it just became a sensory barrage rather than this unsettling thing. I am very much of the thing, other than in a slasher, of when you show the monster, it starts to get a little bit less scary over time.
Absolutely, definitely. It's the fear of not knowing what it looks like that gets me. But yeah, you're absolutely right. As soon as you see it, it's like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Oh, right, you made it on the computer. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last Night in Soho, I have thoughts about that one.
I wrote a review of that for American Spectator, actually, and I think it's an accidentally conservative film.
Oh, that is my favourite kind.
Yeah, I think it's a treatise against the sexual revolution.
Okay, I am gonna have to read that. Okay, I'm sorry. I have to derail. I made a similar case about Saint Maud on that point.
I've heard. Yeah, I remember watching the trailers for that. I haven't seen it.
I recommend it. Yeah, it's one of the older unusual streams. I had Last Things and Aaron McIntyre on, and I was trying to make the case.
Watch that then.
Yeah, it was just I made the case like this isn't anti-religion. This is based. It's. But yes, I'll try not to derail. But I strongly support Saint Maud as a film, and I read it entirely unironically. and I enjoy it a lot more because of that. So Midnight Mass, for a bit of the background, is a passion project. Mike Flanagan, as we know, he did the work, he did the projects that you kind of have to do. Started off with a short that people liked a lot, which was later updated as Oculus, expanded into a full movie. He was given a bit of cash to actually make that, and he did a very good job. He then did a couple of basically for hire films for Netflix. Not judging the guy, he's a working director, so he did things that were kind of random, and he did a good job of them. So a film like Before I Wake, and a prequel to Ouija, which had no right to be good, but he actually made it a kind of cheapy straight to DVD prequel that was better than the original. I think because he sort of gave a darn. He also got into his trick of using the same actors over and over again. That is a bit of a Mike Flanaganism that I've come to know and love. And in a couple of the projects that he was then given more, how can we say, leeway on, he started building in spoilers for this series. So the ones we'll know are Hush. The main character of that is an author who is writing this series, and you see her copies of the Midnight Mass book are on the shelf. As you'll remember, Gerald's Game, there is a copy of Midnight Mass that is on the bookshelf that you can see in there. Flanagan's been setting the stage for this for a long time, and he really wanted to make it. I think he took a bit of a budget cut to do this, so he couldn't do as many episodes. Previously, he was doing 10 episodes, then I want to say an 8-episode series for Bly Manor. This one, he only got 7. But I think through that, he got a lot more control over the project.
I think it works better shorter, frankly.
Definitely.
That's me saying that as well, not liking how he ended it. And also there's the mimesis there of the biblical relevance of the number 7. So Absolutely. Yes, we've got that matter of it's developing. It's got enough time to really develop a story and to take some time on the details and give you a reason to care. You've got time to build up characters that you'll have an emotional response to. But it's also not over long as well. These are all playing to the strengths. It's also a very personal movie. Just to reference, so we talked about how much he wanted to do this, but it's also him getting on the soapbox a bit. It's him expressing a lot of his own personal worldview in this. If that makes you a little nervous, it probably should.
How so?
How can I say? There is sort of a limit on if you're going to express a worldview, there is a bit of a limit on what you can do if you want to go with a mainstream production. And I think that is something we end up seeing in Midnight Mass a fair amount. You also get an idea, I think, of without wanting to get too into it now, because I think we want to really focus on it in the section where we'll just talk about how it handles faith. I did think you really got the idea of the limitations of of Mike Flanagan's perspective.
Okay.
But I don't want to get too into that. For people who did not do their horror homework, and folks, this will be a really confusing stream if you didn't. Would one of you like to do the quick synopsis of what happens over 7 hours?
Sure, I summed up to my dad to tell him to watch it the other day. So, guy accidentally gets in a drink driving accident and kills a girl in the passenger seat, goes to prison, and after he served his time, he returns home to his small community on an island off the coast of the US, fairly indeterminate where exactly that is. They're a very close-knit Catholic community, and when he does return, the priest who they believe has Alzheimer's has been missing for a bit, and a new priest returns in his stead. And with this new priest, some miracles start occurring, but they have a darker and more insidious reason behind it, which plays out over the course of the episodes.
Yeah, very nicely done. Very nicely done indeed.
I think we should bring you back every week to do the synopsis. That was very concise.
I've written a few blurbs before. That's why. So
Okay.
That'll do it. Yeah. We have got. I mean, we talked about the Stephen King influence. We have got the classic isolated, semi-rural community. You know, talk about that conflict. Scream 6 is moving it right into the city, which, as we know, is a danger zone. Anyone who saw Friday the 13th Part 8 can tell you that. This is the relatively safe horror zone of the isolated community, because it does help if your characters are a bit isolated. But we also have, I think, a pretty rich one. In terms of, not in wealth, in terms of a rich picture. They have time to build it up. You get the sense of a large amount of history in it.
They also never felt caricaturish. I think that's quite important, because whenever you deal with, especially there's the trope in horror of the kids driving on a road trip and stopping off at a weird old gas station or something like that. You know, you get the crazy guy in Friday the 13th that gets killed in, I think, part 3. You get the idea that these Americans out in the sticks are kind of eerie, and that the entire town has been driven mad by being isolated with the stigma or whatever monster lurks in the woods or Camp Crystal Lake or whatever. You never get that with this, and that's, I think, in part because the monster is brought to the town rather than we're not stuck in media res with it being there. But also, and I think this connects maybe to the sort of conversation about faith that we'll have later in its representation. I don't think it treats the Christian islanders with contempt. And that was something which aided my viewing, because I expected it to be unmitigated scorn, but these characters are never treated like bumpkins for clinging to their guns or God, as Obama would once say. They felt fairly fleshed out, which I quite enjoyed.
There was a bit at the start. I mean, like you, when I see series is addressing faith, I kind of shudder and think, I think I know what you're going to say. So this was
I watched Louis Theroux's Westboro Baptist Church documentary as well. I get it.
Yeah. There was a moment early on in this where Riley is our main character, mostly. Again, folks, just
I think that's fair.
You know, we will spoil this whole thing. We will give all details of this. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you have warnings here. But you know we go into everything, and I don't think us talking about plot details will actually ruin this for you. It's a rich and involving experience. But Riley comes back, and he's falling into sort of old patterns around his younger brother, played by the impossibly named Igby Rigney. I've never got over that. I know. You thought Dudley Manlove from Plan 9 was the best name, but no, Igby Rigney is the winner. Sorry.
His parents had a pact to get him bullied, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, the girl that he runs over in the hit and run is played by Ebony Booth, which I always thought sounded like a bit like a stage name of a production I would never watch.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I got that damn actor's name. It just distracts me every time. Anyway, the bit I really liked was when they're around the table and they're falling back into a bit of an old pattern, and they crack a couple of jokes about the Monseigneur, and Riley is talking about how he doesn't want to go. He sort of announces, he's fallen out of the faith. And the father actually lays down the law, and you have a strong father commanding respect and setting the standards. And they just go with that. And I thought, oh, they've done that, and he's not the villain.
And the fact that his business is on the wane is not treated as a point of impotence. Like, it's not like he's unable to provide for his family because he's a weak character. It's just because of the nature of the town, which is quite good.
Yeah, exactly. It was a little moment like that made me think, okay, we're going to see something a lot more subtle, a lot more interesting. I mean, if you weren't expecting that from Mike Flanagan, you know, you got those early signs. And when you talked about it not wasting time early on, Connor, I thought that bit when you just have the prologue off island where you see Riley's basically ruined his life and taken another, and he goes to sell, and they dealt with that so quickly. That could have easily been an episode, and I liked how they just condensed that.
Yeah, that was one of my major frustrations with Daredevil season 3. Well, I have many about that, I suppose, but they spent an entire episode on Karen's backstory, and they mangled it from the comics because, of course, you couldn't have a flawed female character like you do in Born Again, and it just hit the brakes on the thriller plot that was otherwise going on with the Kingpin and Bullseye, just to tell this story about how her brother had died and it was all tragic. And I'm glad that they did it in a condensed way that was still shocking. And then they still peppered that trauma throughout with Riley lying on his side, and every time he goes to sleep, he sees her corpse with the police lights illuminated in her eyes.
I love that. Oh, I love that. Great effect there.
Yeah, it was such a haunting image, to be honest, and it had a little bit of that jump scare energy the first time, I believe, and then afterwards it went beyond that. So it wasn't just a cheap jump scare; it told you a lot about the character.
Yeah, it was very I want to say Bly Manor, with, you know, like the guy with the lights for eyes.
Completely.
Like the first time, and it seems to be a bit of a trademark of his now. But yeah, I'm absolutely on board with that. The first time is a bit of a oh my god, but then you expect it every time afterwards, and it just doesn't. Yeah, it stops becoming a jump scare at that point, and yeah, I really like that, and it was good to see that he was doing things like that still.
It became very. It felt just more mature, and I'd say mature is generally how this went. Taking time, not, as you said, not really caricaturing. I think probably the closest you get to a bit of a caricature is Bev Keane.
Yeah.
Who is there to be very hateable. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's caricatural, actually. Because, yes, her appropriation of scripture at any times to kind of postmodernly suit her needs is a caricature when there are Christian villains. But there is a woman like her in every town, every parish, every school, every bureaucratic office, and that is someone who doesn't have their own family to care about, and so she makes the world her children and becomes a devouring mother. And that kind of busybodiness it's organic, even if every other word out of her mouth was a poorly applied Bible verse. So I don't necessarily think she was a caricature, because there are people like that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, she does fit the model of the person who gets a little bit of power and then really uses it with very flimsy justification. I felt there was some shakiness with it, and some stuff that was a bit underdeveloped, like the aspect of, I don't know what you think about this, but one of the elements that was brought up over and over again was the idea that the island was struggling because there'd been an oil spill previously, and Bev Keane, pictured on there, had sort of tried to influence everyone to take a settlement, and then she had got them to donate a bunch of it to the church, and which had led to her building the rec centre. I sort of struggled with that, how the show was trying to make that a big scandal. There were insinuations that she'd maybe kept a lot of it, but I don't think we ever had any indication that she was living a lavish lifestyle.
No, it wasn't.
No.
It wasn't really something that was followed up on. That it was just sort of like passing mentions, wasn't it?
Mm.
I think it was more so meant to be her ability to wield her position as a subordinate priest, particularly as Monsignor Pruitt, when he was older, before he encountered the angel's fountain of youth, was going senile. And so the implication was that she ruled the roost. She was willing to manipulate the islanders for her own gratification and to improve her own reputation among everyone else. And so there's this under bubbling lamentation that she exploited their poor economic circumstances for her own gain. And so I think it's slightly underdeveloped about how where the funds went, if it went to her personally, but even if it just went to the church, it's that she used her misfortune for her pet project, and she definitely runs the place over there.
Mm. There's a really good scene where she talks to Sheriff Hassan, and her playing the game. He's basically suspecting that she has taken poison and she's used it to kill the town drunk's dog. And I love it because if you've seen it, if you remember it, everything is going on above the below. Oh, sorry, I can't speak tonight. Beneath the surface, and she's playing that game of propriety, and she's just. You feel that she's telling the sheriff that, oh, I know you know I did it, but are you going to come out and say it? She really knows how to use her power, which holds very well until I feel the final episode.
Also, I enjoyed her as a villain because I can't remember the exact scene that I'm thinking of, but I remember one adjacent to her. She made some fairly banal points. She wasn't always wrong. Like, she wasn't always utterly insane in everything she said. Like, she was very self-serving. She did reappropriate scripture in the wrong points, and at the end, she's obviously an insane utopian who wants to burn the whole world down and make everyone vampires. But when she's talking, for example, about the sort of preservation of the Christian ethos of the community, and saying like, oh, if you want to have your religion in private, that's fine, but we just sort of don't do that here. I was like, well, there's not really anything objectionable in what she's saying. There's only something objectionable if you're the kind of ethic that it reaches at the end. Not to jump ahead in the conversation, but all religions are kind of equal, and that means they're all kind of equally meaningless, and you can be airy-fairy. If she's like, no, we've been so far a Christian community, and it gives everyone a sense of purpose and it bonds us together. So cool. I just don't agree with you, and we're going to teach that here. I was like, yeah, that's a perfectly reasonable perspective. But,
yeah, I didn't have an issue. Are you talking about the scene where she's essentially debating?
Yes.
I can't remember. Yeah, in the school.
Yep.
Yeah, I felt like she came out on top of that conversation.
Yep. So did I.
Yeah.
I didn't see anything wrong. I mean, I could get what he was. I could get what he was saying, but I mean, you're drilling it down to a small community of people, like you said, who are very like-minded in their belief systems, and you know, it is something that's core to that community. And so, why wouldn't you want to teach that?
Homogeneity is the only thing that's kept them together through hardship.
Exactly, yeah. And so she, in that particular scene, yeah, I totally agree. She made a lot of sense. When that scene ended, I remember pausing it and just thinking, well, actually, I sort of said to myself, she ain't wrong there, is she?
Yeah, this idea of my trouble with this is I don't know how much of this is intentional and how much just sort of leaked out from the unconscious. But there's a narrative here that she is right about keeping Crockett Island going. The island is sort of falling apart under the sort of sensible, rational, modern response, which is everyone kind of is looking after themselves and they leave. So many characters are said to have just gone off. The doctor's obligatory girlfriend who they don't do much with outside of one episode, is basically trying to get her to leave as well. And without the church, you just know that community dies. There's nothing really holding it together. So when the church is sort of empowered a bit more, when people have a reason to go there and to bond, things do genuinely get better on Crockett Island.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a message throughout this, is actually I go back and forth on how conscious it is, but there is a message of making the sort of individualist choice is rational, but it will destroy everything.
So the hilarious thing is, as well, in our efforts to accidentally rescue Bev, we were just talking about how she may have embezzled funds at the oil spill, but also she did pour the settlement money into the church, which, if the angel was not a vampire, people got a genuine sense of meaning of rallying around and returning back to mass. So in a way, I'm not saying it's good, but with the wolves at the door of international markets basically pulling the community apart under economic pressures and drawing people away to go to the mainland and make a lot more money. If the church is the only thing on the island keeping everyone together and still running fairs and still running community events, and people find a sense of solace there, it's not wrong that you would dedicate a portion of the settlement to building some kind of community centre where people could come together. I'm not saying she's the right person to do it. I'm not saying she did it the right way, but it's not beyond the pale that people would donate their money to somewhere the community could shelter.
Yeah, right. Spot on.
Yeah. If we can, I feel like I'll have to skip ahead to the finale since we're on that topic. And again, you've had the spoilers warning, folks. At the very end, Father Pruitt discards his dog collar. He's with the woman that he always loved. And it's all ended tragically. And that discarding of the dog collar reads to me like I should have just done what made me happy. And in reality, what I see is he was keeping a community going. There was a bit of a blind spot that sort of humble sacrifice of just doing the work, sticking around, and not doing what you wanted most for yourself is what the community needs.
Definitely.
And that was, I think, how can I say? We'll get onto it later, but there is a very showy sacrifice in episode 5.
Ugh.
So
Yeah.
Right. So are we?
But the humble sacrifice, that's where it's at. You know.
Are we at leisure to spoil anything?
Oh, spoil the whole
go
thing.
for it.
Oh, okay. So I did like the way in which Riley's death was shot. Because the contrast between the piece of him sitting across from the girl he'd accidentally killed and fulfilling the prophecy he had of his DMT skyrocketing to Joe Rogan levels and seeing him drink before he dies.
Yeah.
That was really nice. Then intercut with Erin screaming, and that was rough to watch. I will say. Especially after their soliloquies in episode 4, which I hope we get to talk about at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the sacrifices, quote, in episode 7, I thought they were utterly egregious because it just reaffirmed a sense of nihilism throughout the entire thing. And my main complaint of episode 7 goes back to the soliloquies of Erin's second soliloquy is horrible. It's soul-destroyingly miserable, but the Californian leftists will definitely feel like it's nice, airy-fairy spirituality, and don't we all feel good? Whereas
the episode 7 one, the "We Are All Stardust."
Yeah, we're all just going to disintegrate into nothingness. So it's okay. We make our own meaning. It's like, okay, we'll ask Nietzsche how that one went. Whereas the one in episode 4, it was quiet place levels of accidental pro-life. And I am not afraid to admit it had me in Jordan Peterson level tears. Like, I had to pause the program. I was thinking, bloody hell, this is powerfully sad.
Yeah. Hey, we'll have our criticisms of this, but one thing I'm not going to fault it on, I cared about these characters. I'm on my third watch of this. It's got to be at least 3. And in episode 2, Joe Colley's dog dying, I was weeping.
Yeah, that was sad.
You know, this got me going over and over again. Joe Colley talking to, as you know, Connor, I never remember any single character's names. Hang on. What's her name? Love interest. Lisa.
Yeah, the
Lisa.
girl,
Yeah. Her going and visiting him was a massive highlight for me.
Yep.
Had me in tears. So
I can confirm I am the only one of the panel here who didn't shed a single tear at this series.
You're kidding me.
Oh,
TCG.
I'm heartless, man. What can I say?
Yeah. Oh man.
Maybe I'm just a massive wet.
I'm trying to hold off just going straight into the faith stuff, but it's so difficult. Oh gosh. Should we stick on the sacrifice thing? Because that's like that would probably be my main problem with the series, just on the story level. Because I would say generally it's handled so darn well, but this would be one of the flipping points. So to set the scene, we've had our protagonist who we've been following through. You know, we're thinking it's Riley's story, even though there's a big ensemble cast, and he goes missing. We find out he's been turned into a vampire, and he takes Erin out onto a boat. Erin, played by Kate Siegel, the director's wife, and you know she's going to be in a Mike Flanagan project. Takes her out on the boat, and it's effectively a sacrifice. He is offering himself up in a way to convince her to get his family out of there. And I was going to say, this is probably my biggest complaint of the show, because his actions do not really make sense.
They don't make any sense. This dude had the opportunity to sabotage it from the inside. I don't get it. I didn't get it at the time. I was so disappointed as well, because I was quite invested in Riley as a character, and when he came back in the next episode, obviously after he goes missing, oh man, I was quite buzzed. And then he takes her out onto the boat, like you said, and he's out there all alone, probably a little bit thirsty, a little bit peckish. And he's like, "Yeah, no, I'm just gonna set myself. I'm just gonna watch the sunrise and turn myself into toast." But don't go back to the mainland. No. You go. No, sorry. Yeah, you go to the mainland. Don't go back to the island. You run off. But I know you're not going to do that. I know you're going to try and save everyone. Like, what's the point?
Yeah, he knows her that well. I mean, we should specify this isn't failing to convince someone is not a story problem. It's kind of interesting if you try and convince someone and you fail. But it's more that of his choices that really nothing changes if he doesn't do it.
No.
And he had more logical choices that he could have made, like trying to do some kind of sabotage. But ultimately, everyone ends up in the church. No one is prepared any differently. So it just makes it, versus, some action he could have possibly taken.
I think so I'm trying to think of how he could sabotage it, given he didn't know the ins and outs of the plan, because it was about 24 hours between becoming a vampire and setting himself alight. The only way I could conceive of him doing better is, rather than writing his parents and that a note, he could have also brought them out to the shoreline when the sun comes up and shown them himself. I'm not really sure what else he could have done. Maybe that's just me being dumb.
I mean, he could have. I mean the Monsignor, however you pronounce it.
Mhm.
Sorry, he was quite keen to have him on board with what he was planning to do. So, I mean, he could have worked with him and got the intel and sort of like the inside sort of scoop as to what they were going to do. What a goal from Anthony. And then at that point, he could have done things like warn Erin. He could have warned his parents. He didn't just have to. He didn't have to check out so early. But I do think actually that idea of having his parents go out onto the shore and watch him burn up would have been quite interesting as well, because immediately after, I think it's the next episode, the dad goes to see the priest, and he's got the letter, and he's quite dismissive because they're quite worried about what he might have said, and it turns out, well, actually, the people he has told, they're not quite convinced. They're like, yeah, he's probably just on another bender now, but you've been speaking to him. Can you share some information? It's almost a bit of a relief for the priest in that regard, because for him it's just business as usual.
Yeah, I'd say he could have also tried burning the church down. Something they ultimately do.
Yeah,
he could have tried to go round and spread the word about everyone, point people to Joe Colley's missing. Just tried a bit more widely, throw things out there that would be harder to refute, but just, I think trying to convince one person is a weak gamble. I mean,
I agree. You could have spoken to the sheriff at least.
Definitely.
The playing along with it, I don't know if it would have worked, just because there's obviously the implication there that the angel is very astute. So I think it would have cottoned on, even if Monsignor Pruitt wouldn't have. But yeah, there were obviously other people he could have gone to.
It was probably more of a moment where I felt that decision might have been made for a bit of shock value. We have the protagonist shifting, and that's not a bad thing. It was effective. Like, as you say, it's a brutal moment, but it's also for a bit of the theme sneaking in. Ultimately you have the guy who's the most committed atheist doing a miraculous act that he wants someone else to spread the word about.
Well,
he even leaves epistles.
Sure. I think, and ultimately this is also what undercuts the sacrifice a little bit, that it plays into the ultimate conclusion of episode 7, which we'll talk about in the faith part, which is that nothing really matters, and your religion is exactly what you make it, and whatever you believe will make you happy, bro, because his death validates his soliloquy compared to Erin's, and that is that our delusions about the afterlife and the euphoria we feel when we go to heaven or whatever is just the chemical rush in our brain that moment before we die, and we don't see our horrific death in the same way that someone sitting opposite us will do. And the series uses his death to confirm that perspective, whereas Erin reneges on her perspective later on. So
yeah,
I think it's that sort of nihilistic pseudo-spiritualism creeping in.
One question we can't avoid asking. He sees the girl played by the unfortunately named Ebony Booth again, and she's restored. She's no longer gory from the accident. She's back as she would be, obviously taking the place of a kind of angelic figure. But how do we understand this? Because it seems that this is her forgiving him.
Yeah.
And how do we interpret that? Because we could take that a lot of ways.
I interpret it in the same way as the horrible Star Wars Episode 9 interpreted it, when they had Ghost Han Solo, Harrison Ford, showing up because he was forced to show up and talk to his son and say, I forgive you, when his son is just hallucinating a vision of his dad, which is what he wants to hear, when he murdered him. And so this is the same argument that when Harry and I were discussing Kingdom Come for Comics Corner, we were like, no, Superman doesn't get to forgive himself for allowing all the superheroes to die, because if you're going to compare him to Christ, then you kind of have to be forgiven by a higher authority who's capable of that. Otherwise, you're just a narcissist and you're making yourself the center of your own emotional universe, especially when you haven't made any proper restitution. For this, I think, obviously, Riley did his time and paid his penance. And that's why I think the repeated image of the dead girl with the police lights in his eyes, you almost become complicit in his own self-torture, and you begin to feel bad for him after a while. But he still did something wrong, and it's not like her family have forgiven him. Like they explicitly don't in the courtroom. So all you're getting is him smoothing over his conscience in his last few moments as DMT rushes to his brain.
Yeah, and it's really interesting as well. And this sort of like talks to Bly Manor as well, where, and I think it's really clever how Mike Flanagan sort of combines both like the supernatural horror with the psychological one. And you know what Riley is experiencing is very much, you know, his own inner demons. It's his own psychological, like you said, torment. And by him giving up his life, I interpret that almost as if by him giving up his life, that's enough for the girl whose life he took to be like an almost like an adequate payment.
It's his redemptive passion.
Yeah. It felt like a redemption moment, but for him rather than anyone external.
He's sort of granting himself the absolution, which is
because it's not
it as well.
Yeah, because it's not like a ghost or another supernatural being. You know, it's his own mind playing games with him when he's seeing that girl at night. You know, with the flashing lights shooting out of her wounds. It's his mind that's projecting that girl. You know, all looking, you know, like she was before the accident, holding her hand out in almost like an embracing way to say, you know, it's okay, I forgive you, but without actually saying it, but conveying that through like facial expressions. I'm with you, Connor, on that. It's quite a narcissistic view from his from Riley's perspective. Like, I've done enough now. I've made peace with my demons. I'm putting it all to bed now. You sort yourselves out. Do what you want.
I could try and take the priest out, but
yeah.
Nah, you have fun with that.
Yeah. And you don't have to. You can go to the mainland, but you'll probably go back to the island and try and save everyone. But you know,
I don't want to even indict his character as a narcissist, but it's just a sort of narcissistic presupposition that's baked into modernity, of where we're so self-focused that like it's not even entered the mind of the writer that anyone other than him would be required to forgive him for him to be forgiven in the eyes of the audience.
Yeah, we do. I just cross the limits of the writer a few times.
Yeah, I just feel sorry to interrupt again. I just want to go back to it, but I really feel like if Riley was looking for some sort of redemption arc, his motivation would have been to try and save as many lives as possible, rather than just potentially one woman. I mean, for Christ's sake, he took her out on a wooden boat, knowing that he was going to torch up.
Yeah,
that's a perfect point.
This is some big brain moments.
I mean, come on, dude.
Why, it's so crazy it just might work.
Exactly.
Yeah. Of course, I've mentioned Igny Rigby every time. Oh, I did see the earlier question, by the way. Robert Bloch, not as far as I know, but he wrote about them, so you'll know him best from writing Psycho. And if you are going for bonus points, you will know him from writing Amicus Productions' Asylum, 1972. I do believe he corresponded with Lovecraft, but I'll wait for Murgut to confirm that. Oh, yep. Murgut, are we in sync?
It's funny because
so
2 or 3 of my colleagues have mentioned Lovecraft today, completely independent of each other, and so I think we are going to have to cover some of his works for Lotus Eaters at some point.
They're all watching, I'm telling you, Connor. They're all watching. You know, when we did our second Lovecraft arc and spent 50 minutes talking about Lovecraft and Spengler, you know, that's what they love on YouTube.
Mr. Gently Benevolent really wants me to talk about Lovecraft's cat, but I've said that when I hit 25 subscribers on Rumble, I might talk about it on a live stream there, because there is no way that stuff's going to fly on YouTube.
Gosh, I mean, okay, so getting into the faith discussion, seeing as I'm mindful of our time, there are so many threads I could pull on here, but
can I do a transitional one?
Oh, please do.
So
Yeah.
on the concept of sacrifice, and again, this is going to really annoy me about Erin's character.
Mhm.
The soliloquy in episode 4 was utterly beautiful. When she was talking about like my daughter was here and now she's not, and she never was, but she always was, and she was pure. And one day I was going to see her again. And I was like, whoa, wow. And then it's dropped, and it's like, okay, so when she finds out that the blood that has been healing people had killed her baby because it believed it was a parasite, because that's exactly how demonic entities work, see the pro-abortion movement, then suddenly she's not mad at Bev or Monsignor Pruitt for basically conspiring to give her this communion without her knowledge and kill her baby. No, she's more mad about Riley. And it's like, sure, I'd get you're upset, but does your baby that you were not upset about not factor into it? And so that, again, is the sort of selfish Christian presuppositions leaking into the characterization, because a devoutly Catholic woman would be very, very bothered about that.
Well, you're absolutely not wrong. That one of the things I don't know if this will land well with many people, but one of the things I sort of am sketchy on the show about is I feel Erin is used for what they would call to steal from the feminist discourse. She's the Christian equivalent of the cool girl. You know, she's
I'm looking
in there.
at Gone Girl on my shelf right now.
Oh my gosh, there we go. You know, I'm thinking back to the scene in the classroom. You have Sheriff Hassan, very adamant that Christianity needs to stay out of the classroom. Bev pushing a bit more of a, not really owning it, but still kind of going for a bit of a base, like, no, this is what we do here, and it's fine, and it's good, come on. And Erin sort of I don't support Bev. I'm just kind of cool. Let's just keep it neutral, guys. And that one of the things I am kind of yanking this back to something that bothered me was just the show really did seem to buy the idea of the neutral institution, which is really awkward now. This is 2 years after that, and is your classroom neutral?
Yeah, progressive Christianity is only okay within the progressive paradigm.
Yeah, it was that thing of keep it neutral is sort of be balanced, and that clears the way for something else to come in.
Yeah.
And it's really, that discourse has not landed well. That has not preserved well after what's going on in Wakefield. A reference which will be very dated for anyone watching on the replay. But moving on. Sorry. Yeah, my issue with Erin was that I felt she was a bit of a cool Christian. She was there to not really provide any pushback or preservation.
She had the same depth of theological knowledge as a youth pastor. And that's not a compliment.
That has broken my heart. I'm not even going to impotently shake my fist because I'm afraid it's very familiar. There was another trope that turned up that I'm afraid. Again, I'm going to give this series such a high score. So don't be fooled. I love this. It's because I like it so much that I'm picking on these details because it has a theme worth discussing. Flanagan brings up a trope that he's very fond of, and I'm sure you'll love this. The guy who's read every holy book. Now, this was a lot worse in The Haunting of Hill House. They had a 10-year-old, the genius 10-year-old who'd read everything. He'd read the Quran, he'd read the Talmud, he'd read the Tawi, and it's no, I don't think he did. They struggle enough to get through a fighting fantasy novel without cheating. I'm sorry, I have a Talmud. There's no way your 10-year-old read that.
There's no pop-up pages.
Exactly.
So why would they read it?
Well, also, like, Yeah, I'm sure that Mike has read the Quran. Has you read the Hadiths by any chance? Because they're also equally as important, and they're not quite as happy clappy Islam as the sheriff puts forward. There's some really dodgy verses about what happens on Judgment Day there that aren't really represented.
Oh man, I mean that is a whole other area, isn't it?
I will say, sort of, Bev, in that particular scene, Bev did sort of allude to some of the verses in the Quran not being quite as polite and friendly. Although,
Based Bev?
Well, yeah, but she also sort of like counteracts that with the Old Testament as well, which again, depending on what you. I'm not. Look, I'm no religious scholar. I've not read the Quran in depth. I've read pieces of the Bible. I am definitely not a 10-year-old child from Bly Manor, nor am I a Muslim sheriff in a small community island. I'm not as well versed as either of those two. But I mean, sure, you can sort of pick apart those two scriptures in particular and know that there's some not very nice bits in there, but I kind of forgot where I was. I've kind of lost my trail of thought here.
If I can piggyback off of that, just
go for
while you regain it, I do think that anyone who has a understanding theology, again, I'm not an expert, just tentative studying, the way that the Quran and Hadiths versus the Old and New Testaments work means that Bev's criticisms are entirely valid, but instead they just put them in the mouth of the villain in order to dismiss it, to have this kind of progressive amoralism, and you can have whatever spirituality you like, because the Hadiths actually supersede the verses in the Quran. And the Quran has spotty parts, but it's mostly in the vein of what they would call the Abrahamic religions, so the big three.
Yeah.
And then when you get to the Hadiths, it is Muhammad's equivalent of "it came to me in a dream." And there are many warmongering verses in there because this was his time as a warlord. And also there is a Hadith verse which says that on Judgment Day, the rocks and trees will come alive and tell...
Hey, we're on YouTube. I know that Hadith.
Do something to Semitic peoples. Yes. And that is superseding the supposing peace-loving verses of the Quran. Whereas the wrathfulness of the Old Testament, which particularly applied to the tribal Jews wandering through the desert, was superseded by the verses of Christ, which said that, okay, you can keep some of the old commandments, particularly the 10, but get rid of most of the Jewish laws because most of the Pharisees implementing them are hypocrites anyway, and then keep my two main commandments, which is love God with all your heart and love thy neighbor as thyself. And so the New Testament and its morality was meant to supersede the Old Testament. So much of the wrathful eye for an eye stuff, which I kind of don't mind, particularly because I quite like Revelation. But anyway, if you're going to make an argument the Old Testament out of date, yeah, Jesus agrees with you, whereas Muhammad doesn't. So
I want to throw something out there that I don't know how this will land. And the follow-up I really want to ask you, Connor, since we have you here. Folks on the channel will know I go to church. I'm not Catholic, though, so I really want your perspective in particular. But I was going to... I think the handling of Islam is very up and down, and the best part of it was possibly completely unintended. So just because we're talking about how Erin is the kind of Christian that is promoted, so the sort of, I keep it to myself, you would never know, this has no impact on anything around me, it's all fine, bro. Yeah, just please do deconstruct me. I love it. Sort of mode of thinking that Erin represents is kind of contrasted with a really nice bit with Sheriff Hassan and his son, where Sheriff Hassan is absolutely 100% not down that line, and I just felt was very honest about it. He makes a big deal about, no, son, I don't want you to just be religious and do whatever. I actually really care. And I really care that you stick with Islam. And I liked that, and I thought that was very honest.
Yeah, but gatekeeping is allowed for people at the bottom of the intersectional stack.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
To be fair, I think they could have made that argument if it was the other way around and it was Christian, because I think his reasoning for wanting his son to stay in, to remain in the Muslim faith was centered around, because he mentions while he's talking that he became a Muslim for his wife. So it's almost implied that he wasn't Muslim before, that he was more secular, but he remained with the faith because despite his wife getting, was it pancreatic cancer, I think it was, and it was almost like he was telling the story of Job in a way, because she was she was going through, like, everything was being taken away from her dignity, her health, and all that, but yet she remained true to her faith, and through that he remained a Muslim after she passed. And for his son, for their son to then sort of stray away from the faith, I think he found that more disrespectful to the memory of his mother, Sharif's wife, than it actually being sort of, I'm not really interested in Muslims, in being Muslim anymore. I feel like I'll try a bit of Christianity, Dad. There was a more of a personal level to it than just a theological one. I think
it's purely personal, and I think that's my problem with all of this, and that is that I don't even think Erin is necessarily the type of Christian that they're trying to present as being okay, because she renounces her Christianity at the end in the same way that Monsignor Pruitt does. I think the level of Christianity that they find acceptable is, oh, you're about to die, sing some songs so you'll feel better. In the same way that Sharif says that I'm only a Muslim because my wife was, and so to honor her memory, I have these convictions based on my interpersonal experience rather than any kind of metaphysical connection or deeper truth. And also, as someone has pointed out in the chat, he clearly isn't that devout because he doesn't carry out the penalty for apostasy, let's say.
Yeah, the NRA making a very good point there. Yeah. You'll also notice. I mean, we have to do this. This screen cap is just labeled episode 6, the worst scene.
Yeah, this is when the entire series fell off a cliff. So I would actually rate this series fairly high until this exact moment, and then this till the end of episode 7 is atrocious.
All right, give everyone the lowdown on what is happening here and why this is the series deciding to just go down those extra 3 Guinnesses. What's the harm it could do?
Oh no, I needed a bottle of Jack to finish this scene. So the Doctor comes in, also on the intersectional pyramid, and she decides to start explaining to him that something weird is happening in the town. I forget exactly what she says. I think she tells him about the blood, and doesn't she say that Riley's probably dead?
Yeah.
And then I can't remember his reason for getting his back up, but then he starts going off on one about how...
I can tell you exactly what it was.
Go for it.
It was she's got very strong reasons to say, please investigate the church.
Yeah. And and he said, I can't get away with investigating because they already distrust me because I'm a Muslim. And I've been distrusted my entire life because I used to work in the New York Police Department. When the towers came down, it just made me even more dedicated to serve America, damn it. And then they used me as an insider to spy on those Muslims who didn't do nothing. And then I found out that they were getting very distrustful of me when I wouldn't go a step further. And so they then revoked all my privileges and treated me like I was a terrorist when I was just a law-abiding Muslim, patriotic American. And it's like, wow, fantastic fan fiction. Brilliant. Yeah, great. Thank you for reaching for the screen and smacking me in the face with your lecture.
I just interpreted this. I think I've messaged you privately on the show at the end because, it's a legitimate concern. And as a police officer, you have a duty, you have a duty of care and you have to, investigate any potential leads or whatever, So she comes in, says, look, I've literally got blood boiling in my petri dishes. This is going on. I suspect the church is involved. Can you help? And he goes, certainly. But first of all, let me tell you how racist the police were after 9/11.
This is the most important thing to cover.
I know. And I'm just thinking to myself, sure, you can have that conversation, but now isn't the time to be having that. There is no reason why you should be having this conversation right now. I'm sure.
Have you considered he's allowed to derelict duty if he's offended?
I just like, sure, mate. I'm sure they were all a-holes to you after 9/11. I don't dispute that. I'm sure the level of trust was low at the time. But what has that got to do with what is happening right now? Just do your job, mate. No wonder you're out in the sticks.
It is rough. I mean, look, the scene is so bad that Raoul Coley's accent leaves at multiple points.
Oh my god, yes, I noticed that. Yeah,
bless him. He is a grand actor. He plays Warhammer. You know, you got to respect it.
It's weird seeing him in, because I used to watch Funhouse when I was younger. Before that all went absolutely
a whole lot of fun.
Breasts up. And
Prizes to be won.
It's
a real crazy show. You know, I've heard anything can go.
Yeah, it's weird seeing him in anything remotely playing anything other than himself. So.
Yeah, Screen 6 already. We are not counting the TV series, Grunt, my friend. I'm going there tomorrow. Cross your fingers. It's going to be a gamble. You know, 6 but hey, look, Friday the 13th, their 6th entry was pretty darn good. Could work out. Anyway, yeah. It's just rough. Raoul Cody, as we said, great actor. I think he was... I mean, I kind of want to say this is his best performance, even though it's not as much of a crowd pleaser as it is in Bly Manor, but you can't get away from the fact that he's here for a quota. And it's really awkward when you have a good actor being given a role just to meet Netflix quotas.
I don't know. I'm going to sort of push back on that a little bit.
Well, let me just put it out there. Like, you go to all the trouble of doing this thing out in the middle of nowhere and you try and make it authentic, and then you put him in, and then you don't really do as much with the character as you could, and you basically give him a huge monologue that doesn't work as well, and his faith doesn't get the examination, doesn't get the brutal examination and treatment that Catholicism does.
Because that's the express purpose of the character.
His like the treatment of Islam in this is, man, it's rough that people are suspicious of you. Whereas the treatment of Catholicism is literally the entire root of anything coming from you is evil.
Yeah.
A bit of an exaggeration, but you know.
Well, you know what? I don't think it treated Catholicism with contempt. It just dragged it down to the sort of nihilistic spiritual level that it did with everything, because it didn't want to reaffirm anything as true. But it allowed the Muslim character to affirm his religion as true despite its grounding in the personal. So what it did was it ripped the foundations out of all of the religions, the purely spiritual, but it still privileged Islam as the most virtuous by merit of it being the belief of the most virtuous character in the thing.
I think, I mean, I'm trying to think.
It's cool. Push back. It's fine.
No. I'm trying to think how to word it, because I saw this. I mean, again, they sort of infer that, you know, Crockett or Crocker Island or whatever they call it is a bit of a melting pot. So you do have a bit of a mishmash of other sort of ethnicities and races and religions, and not religions, but it's implied that this is quite a diverse island from the outset. But you know, the core identity of the island is, you know, it is a strong Christian identity. These guys, this character for me was the outsider coming in, trying to integrate as best as he could possibly within the remits of his own sort of, you know, restrictions, you know, because obviously he couldn't go to a church because he's not a Christian. So there was that. There was the conflict that he had with his son, because his son was obviously Muslim, but because of the cultural influences around him, he was getting drawn into the Christian, you know, the Christian sort of side of that thing, of that culture. And you know, there was I think the conflict is less to do with the Islam versus Christianity side of it, and I think it was more to do with, you know, this chap and his own son. The disputes between the two religions did sort of come up here and there, you know, through certain dialogue moments. In particular, that scene with Bev. But do I think they could have handled it better? Absolutely. I do agree with you, Horrorshow, that you know, I felt like this scene in particular was very, very poorly sort of, you know, thrust in there to try and make some sort of point.
Oh, I do have a question though. Like, what's the purpose of making a Muslim other than this building to this express speech right here to beat the audience over the head?
You could make him Jew.
Yeah, but they didn't.
Make him Jewish. No. I'm sure. No, I know they did.
But that's what I'm saying. So they expressly made this character to beat the audience over the head about Islamophobia, and so I don't think this character could have been rescued because he was just a mouthpiece.
There's great stuff they could have done, but I think they just don't dare. And a point I'm going to make every time this kind of thing comes up is effectively there just isn't cultural knowledge enough to do any kind of considered critique. Which means you always get the really basic level talking point.
This was what I was saying last week when we were talking. Culturally, you know, America, you know, is culturally a Christian country, so you would expect that the people of America would know that side of the religion inside out. You know, on average, more than say, you know, Judaism, Buddhism, Islam, and those sorts of things. So I think it's easier to criticize a religion that you're more familiar with than one that you're not, because not out of fear of offense, but you know, you just might not be as well educated, and so it's easy to put an outsider in to.
Well, I think quite a few people in the film industry might know Judaism a little bit better, but.
Well,
but
then,
also,
okay.
Let's be fair as well. The film industry and people that are in this did not, even if they were so inclined as to criticize Islam, which they aren't, again, because of the nihilistic airy-fairy stuff and the progressive stack. But even if they were, they would not be as so brave because they would be protested and they'd quite like their heads to stay attached to their body. So that's just a simple fact. Like even if they were going to make a Muslim character, they could not do as considered a critique as they did of Christianity or attempted to do with Bev with a Muslim character. They just couldn't, because then the Christians won't come after them in the same way. Like I enjoyed elements of this series despite being perhaps the exact kind of person they're trying to critique with Bev. You know?
Funnily enough, I said the same thing last week. It's easy to mock Christianity because they're a bit of a punching bag in that regard. So of course, you know,
they're kind of all about forgiveness unless you read a Revelation. So
I said yesterday, this is what I was saying last week. You know, and you know, that's their religion, man. Do what they do. But I mean, it's like I say, I try to look at this from another angle. I mean, you're absolutely right, though, man. I mean, this was very much a slap in your face. This didn't need to be in the show, because I was more interested in the conflict that he was having with his son. I was more interested in the conflict he was having with Bev. This had no purpose in the show, and yeah, it's disappointing that it's there, because I think it would have served a better purpose had he, you know, said something along the lines of, "Sure, I'll look into that for you."
It was a weird thing as well that he comes out in the speech being like, you know, no one's ever asked me why I came here, and it's sort of as if people were weird about him, but I just saw that actually everyone was explicitly welcoming to him. Mayor Flanders goes out of the way to say, "Hey, it's your island too," when he talks about that your island, and then the leaving himself out. That's episode 2 at the start, and Mayor Flanders comes and says, no, it's your island too, Sheriff. So this sudden thing that he's an outsider just doesn't match with what we see,
because it's not meant to be about the characters. It's meant to be an indictment of us. That's the point. So that's the only reason he's in the show, which is why it took me out of it.
It's rotten. I mean, Raoul Coley, as we say, good actor, and one of Mike Flanagan's regulars. He's an absolute treat in Bly Manor. But
he played the father aspects. He played very well. I will, especially when his son was taking the demonic communion. I fell for him being wrestled to the ground and shooting the angel and that. But when he is browbeating me, you know, I wasn't.
I might be wrong on this, but I felt that they sort of pulled a punch with Ali because there's a potential absolute knife in the heart tragedy there of if Ali was going to church and not taking communion,
Oh my
which he
God, yeah.
wouldn't have been, he wouldn't have had enough of the vampire blood to resurrect him. So you're having to say that he's resurrected on that tiny bit that he only has at the end of episode 6.
Do you know,
So Ali shouldn't have resurrected.
Yeah, I forgot that he'd taken that because when he actually took the poison, I was like, no, because he's not going to get up. And then when he did, I was like, oh, he must have taken some communion. Because I mean, I obviously missed that bit because I think that would have been an absolute kick in the guts if he didn't come back.
It's one of the harshest bits it should have been, I think, and it would have sold it because I'm with you. I think that the father and son storyline has a potential to be the best thing in the show.
Yeah,
it just feels so fresh, to be honest. But I just don't think they had the conviction to really explore it and go in on it.
There are a few little errors peppered here and there. One of the ones that does spring to mind is the disabled girl's mum. At one point, does the gospel reading within one of the masses, and in the Catholic Church that is expressly not allowed. Like, women are not allowed to read the gospel. That's just a rule in there. So there are some strange little slip-ups that they do that means it's not either, they're not quite as authentic or they don't execute on the potential that they have.
That's something I really wanted to ask you about. I just don't have the familiarity with Catholicism in particular. My church is not high Anglican, but not a middle, maybe. It's not low church, but it's not all the way Anglo-Catholic.
Right. So it's not C of E, at least.
I'm afraid.
Oh, you're one of Henry VIII's divorce courtiers, are you?
Hey, I mix it up. I go to a Baptist on occasion, you know. Anyway, so I wanted to ask how it felt seeing Catholicism on screen. Like, did you things like that little error that you caught are interesting because that flies over me.
The rest of the mass felt fairly authentic, and the community feel felt authentic, even though there was the unsettling undertone there. There was a sense of wholesomeness and well wishes with everyone, and a sense of reliance on the church as a gathering point that wasn't scorned, I don't feel, until the final episode, of course. And the homilies that were delivered by Monsignor were quite authentic. They were a little bit more bombastic than some that I've seen, but that also might be an Americanism, because I have seen some American pastors, priests, and the like being a bit more exaggerative. And I can actually speak to that a little bit because my priest, who uploads his homilies online as well, that I occasionally share on Twitter, he's a lovely gentleman, is Canadian, and he is very expressive and not afraid of pulling his punches in terms of contemporary issues and politics. He even watches Lotus Eaters and GB News, so he's very clued in. And so I did quite enjoy the impassioned nature that Monsignor Pruitt gave his homilies with, because that lined up with my personal experience. And also, if I might just say, the actor in question did a fantastic job. He was brilliant. Yeah, he had that priestly patience, and I liked the fact that you could see his facial tics in the moments when someone presents him with a really deeply personal problem, where he's searching his mind for something that sounds profound, and then you can almost see in his eyes when his brain switches off and he just talks from his gut, where he's hoping that something authentic is divulged from his unconscious that consoles their conscience, rather than just trying to sound smart and trying to fall back on almost the rationalism that Bev uses the Bible with, where she has a quote to hand at any time. If you notice, he doesn't nearly quote as often as she does, and he just talks quite authentically. And so that felt a lot more like an actual priest would. So I think they did a very good job with Monsignor Pruitt.
Yeah. I really appreciate the way that he delivered his lines as well. This is just something that I picked up. When you're watching a film, everything feels really clean. It feels very cleanly delivered. or even a TV show for that matter. I just love the way that he would like almost stumble on his words as he was talking, or almost like self-correct while he was mid sentence. I just love the way he delivered it. It felt unbelievably natural, and I kind of appreciate that delivery style was probably intentional because of who he was. Because obviously for those in the chat who didn't watch this, spoiler alert, he is the old senile priest that goes away, that goes to the mainland. Then obviously when he's nibbled on by the vampire, he comes, his youth is regenerated and his mind is restored. But it seems like you said those tics that he had and those small stutters seem to remain. And it was a bit of an audio visual clue that this guy isn't actually who he says he is. But the fact that he carried it on after the big reveal, I just really appreciate it.
Yeah, the vibe I got from him was just someone who's being so patient, having heard a lot of nonsense, or rather, he's seen people struggle and he's seen people come to him over and over again. He's just someone who's worked with people in the messy times so much, and he's got that patience when they're working through things. Felt so authentic. I love that. That I really felt that had been nailed. Like he's someone who is used to the tougher parts of the world. That felt so authentic to me. And the way he dialogues with Riley, who is explicitly, there to challenge him. Initially, I thought, obviously, we know how the story ends up, but there were some moments early on in these dialogues where it's very obviously faith versus reason. It's set up so, obviously combatorially there. There were some moments where he really got to, I think, make a very strong case that I didn't expect. I'll throw out a specific example. So 2 things that I did not expect to come up in this were the moment where Riley cracks a really fun joke. So just, folks, if you haven't watched this, a setup for the atheist and the priest being in the room together.
Start of a joke, isn't it?
Oh, terrible, terrible. Well, he drops a good joke, doesn't he? It's an AA meeting, and he says, "Have you heard about RR, AA for pirates?" It's a great joke. I laughed. I loved it. That's a scenario for them to come together, and it's good. And of course, we haven't really mentioned it. It's a bit obvious, and they don't overplay it. But the idea of, Riley has this sort of the thirst for alcohol, and then he gets vampirism, the thirst for blood. They don't do too much with it. They don't overplay it, which I think is very well judged. Riley starts pushing back on Father Pruitt. He relaxes a little bit and he talks about rational recovery, which for those who don't know, AA is very involved in the idea of a higher power. It doesn't specifically have to be Christian.
Well, it does mention capital G God in the original version. So
then I will bow to you on that one. I lack some familiarity, but you do have to have a higher power involved in AA. So he is going for RR, which is the secular equivalent. And I know I've taken a long time to get to this point, but this was a kind of based point in the show that I never expected it to make. Riley starts doing some psychobabble. He sounds a little silly. He starts dropping what basically sounds a bit like Reddit level cope to let himself off the hook, and it becomes really obvious that he's dropping things that sound slightly ridiculous but have a Febrezing of rationality to them.
Pseudo profundity.
Yeah, exactly. And he's kind of letting himself off the hook with it, and it's a delicate, subtle delivery. And you think, they're actually letting you have a little dab on rationalism there. I never thought I'd see that coming.
But it's annoying that he gets validated, isn't it?
I mean, look, we're all disappointed by how it goes, but the other point that I thought that was amazing was just Father Pruitt cutting him down with the line about basically, with you being the boss of everything, how's that working out? I mean, that's a pretty strong question to ask.
Yeah.
Is how is it going? What's the Fight Club line? How's that working out for you being clever? Best line in the film for me. And Father Pruitt basically gets to ask it. And I thought, this is something that looks like it's actually going to try some new ideas out. I've spoken for absolutely ages there. Please.
Well, I agree. And this is to come back to my frustration about these deep threads that the series weaves and then ultimately cuts. It sets it up to have Riley question his faith or their lack of faith. And as soon as he makes the sacrifice play, which is rather questionable, it then validates his DMT theory with the vision of forgiving himself. So it turns out that being your own boss does actually work out for you, because you can just dream the girl that you killed and she's all right with it. And then the main sticking point in the narrative again is Erin, her beautiful soliloquy in episode 4, that then devolves into both one of the most damning plot holes in the entire series, where the angel is feasting on her for an ungodly amount of time, and she's able to slash its wings, and even despite feeding on a human being, which should regenerate it, it both doesn't notice or just allows her to slash the wings and doesn't repair itself, even though that's a superpower. And it focuses on that to give her a redux of her soliloquy, to the point of where it even cuts back and forth to her talking to Riley, retconning the scene of where she's not talking about an accidental pro-life sentiment and that she'll see her daughter again in heaven, which was beautiful. Really. It talks about how we're all utterly meaningless and we're just energy fields and we'll dissipate and we'll reincarnate, and so we have to make our own meaning because God is just in our brain, bro. And it was like, oh,
we're all stardust,
really?
yo.
Yeah, just thank you, Crystal Girl. Like, get away from me, please. I'm not nearly drunk enough to talk to you at this party. Like, it was like ripping the dense, nuanced metaphysical points out and going back to Dreamcatcher speak, and it's just frustrating, very frustrating. I feel like I got intellectually blue-balled by this series.
Yeah, it's one of those things that after some really promising stuff, I think we've touched on some areas where I think the writer was not aware. I mean, we can't say for definite it's Mike Flanagan. There were additional writers. His brother James Flanagan was a co-writer on most of these. But you notice where some limitations are in there. As we said in the school scene, the idea of, the school should be totes neutral, bro, is like, oh, come on. You cannot think that at this point.
No.
And then, I mean, getting to the we're all stardust bit moment, which I felt was a very disappointing one, I couldn't pick out exactly why she switched over.
No.
Did anyone pick that out?
No, and I thought, again, if anything, she should have been even more furious knowing that these people took her child from her, but it's never brought up. Like, it's never used as a motivating factor, which I thought was dropping the ball on the script.
Just to go back to the vampire and the sucky bit, when she's just yammering on for eternity.
TCG, family friendly.
Hey, I didn't get
you love your
minds out of gutters. I didn't mind too much of the fact that the vampire wasn't paying attention as she was cutting into the wings, because it does kind of allude to the fact that when he's feeding, that becomes the angel's sole focus. Because if you remember, the two kids find him in in the house along, and then he's feeding on two people, and they're like shooting it with the rifles, and it's just sort of like, get off me, and then carries on eating. So, but you're absolutely bang on with regards to the tears though, because I'm thinking, like yourself, I'm thinking like, shouldn't that be regenerating like as she's doing it?
Well, he would have
like,
shrugged off
really
those
quickly.
gunshots because he knew he would heal from feeding, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
then-
I mean, he gets set on fire for crying out loud in that scene.
I mean, can we ask why he wears the Shaz ball?
I mean,
Name
yeah.
that correctly. I never worked this out, and I kind of feel that on one level, this is the vampire does what we need him to do. Don't ask questions. Just consume next parishioner. Sorry, autopilot.
That's great.
Does that feel fair? Because we had a weird line as well. Like, one of the big questions after watching this was, how does the angel get here?
Yeah.
Oh, it's in the chest.
Mm.
How does he transport this massive chest through security?
Yeah, didn't go for customs at any point.
And it's
No, he bribed a lot of people. He bribed people. Remember, that's what he said.
well, he later says in confession about the angel flying, and it's like, oh, okay. Could the angel
Air traffic control didn't notice
fly
it clinging onto
to
the
you?
wing.
That might it's more of a nitpick, but I wouldn't
That's
have
not a
noticed
nitpick.
it if it's sort of a nitpick because they left these half explanations for how it got there, and then I'm just like,
Yeah, but then
why,
that's like
why
that's
does
like,
it wear a Shaz ball? Why?
that's like saying like that Palpatine has returned is not a nitpick. It's like we can you can somebody's there.
Really gone.
How is the question?
Yeah, well, you mean like the nitpick of in 1997 something happened?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What was that, Tom? Still haven't got around to asking him.
Oh dear.
Oh man, I met the Dark Lord as well when he was going through that election campaign. I should have seen it coming.
Mm.
Terrible.
Yeah, Pruitt does have Tony Blair's current haircut, doesn't he?
What do you any comment on that one?
But then Tony Blair nicked that from Michio Haku, didn't he? That scientist who believes in like 12 dimensions.
He does actually. Yeah, the comment. Yeah, he does look a little bit like Wheatley, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, he does look a little bit like John Wheatley.
Anyway.
God bless him.
I was also going to say, I felt the moment, Bev's moment of revelation that actually, you know what? Let's just burn it all down, yo.
Mm.
I know.
Extremely
like,
convenient.
It's just dumb.
Look, as we said, the bungling of the end, it's going to happen.
But it didn't need to. Like this is, I expect that from almost every Netflix series these days. Most things, to be fair. I mean, again, I have terrible taste. I've been watching You since it started, and
I've been watching you too since you started on Lotus Eaters.
Woo.
Buy me a drink sometime. The first season I thought was far better than it had any right to be. The second season was bad, but I sort of did fancy love a bit because I have horrible taste in women. The third season was an exercise in character assassination, and as they're drawing near to the close of the series, it's just getting more and more ridiculous. Where, spoilers for season 4, if anyone really cares, they've done a fight club, and it's I don't know if you watch it, but they've just basically they've turned Joe crazy. That's just all I can say. It's dumb. And so my suspension of disbelief is getting more and more egregious to the point of where I know it's just gonna end anticlimactically. It's gonna be very unsatisfying. And so I wasn't shocked that this ended damply, but it just didn't need to, because the quality was there consistently until about halfway through episode 6. And I do think, again, it's because so many of the, not irreligious, but because of the neutral institution spirituality was baked into the writer's worldview, they couldn't escape getting to that conclusion where they just tried to make too many people happy and ended up satisfying no one.
Yeah, I think you really do put it well there, that it's the presumptions that are baked in. Gosh darn it! You need to have one of us on the writing staff to put these challenges in. and ask that annoying question about the vampire's wings, because gosh darn it, that bugs me.
Yeah. I feel the same about one of my dreams before I decided to enter the political fray was, I was like, oh, you know what, I'm going to work really hard so one day I can contribute one of the short stories in the inevitable 300-page version of Superman's 100th anniversary comic. And then I got to about 20 and I realized, oh, they're never going to hire me because I'm white. It's like, right, okay, great. So it doesn't matter how much I complain about media, which I still will, because hopefully, people create some different stuff, and if I ever get time to write again, I will. But it's like there's no point expecting better of them or asking them to hire us to fix their stuff, because they just don't care. They never will. Like they are in their bubble and they don't want us popping it. And this is, it's like Rogue One. This is so close to greatness, and then they just flopped it at the end.
That they get some really genuinely interesting. I mean, I think we're moving for time purposes. We're moving into the sort of closing parts. So I'm going to start feeding my thoughts in. Like there are moments when this was doing some really good challenges, and for me personally, the best challenge is literally that question of how's life working out in this fully secular regime? How does life look without the church there? And that's one of the strongest cases here. Like otherwise the show ends up pushing ultimately kind of individualist liberalism, where everyone is a rational self-interested actor, and nothing from the start of the show. You see, actually that attitude destroys that island quicker than anything.
Yeah. And religion is the last vestige of cope that you have to console yourself when that individualism burns you alive.
Well, yeah, it's the main thing. I'll try and hammer the point home. It's like the show presents you the big sacrifice that Riley makes as the big moment, and it's not, because that ultimately really doesn't lead to anything. The big sacrifice, the major one, the crucial one, is Father Pruitt's sacrifice of not giving himself what he wanted, and being there for a community that desperately needed him. He was there every single day for Lisa turning up for a service, and that is the biggest sacrifice, which the show, I feel, does not know and does not understand, because it says you should go to the mainland. Oh dear. And ultimately, I think, kind of inevitably, after some promise, I think we did end up back down at, I mean, tell me if it's too harsh, folks, but kind of 2000s era dogma of you can believe something, but kind of like don't do anything with it.
Yeah, it was almost Fukuyama in thinking, no, we've already reached the end of history. Your bitter clinging is kind of outdated, and you can kind of keep it private. But when the crisis comes, you can sing some songs to make yourself feel better. But ultimately, it doesn't matter, because post-enlightenment rationality's figured it all out. You just have a DMT trip when you die, so it'll be whatever you want, man. No, stop it.
Yeah, I think the ending on a monologue of absolute boomer narcissism was
Yep. It was such a boring monologue.
I mean, this is something that people do call out the series for, is that people are let loose to just go for 7 minutes at a time, and it's very
I mean, even Sharif's monologue when he was talking about how racist the cops were after 9/11, that he droned on for a bit, didn't he?
Yeah, just a tad.
And she just sat there and listened to it. Again, I would have just stopped him. Like, look, mate, I'm sorry, I'll stop you there, right? I appreciate you probably had a hard time on the mainland, but are you going to look into my concerns or not?
Anyway, this guy's probably missing, probably dead. So if you could just like do your job.
You're sitting there festering over how mean people were to you.
Yeah, you haven't even got the town drunk to lock up anymore, so there's literally nothing else.
Yeah, I know.
There's also one of my chief complaints, just to finish on as well, is Bev's final moments. It does show a lack of understanding of theology beyond the artifice of it, because yes, she was misappropriating biblical scripture for her own ends, But there's also the thing of if they were trying to criticize Christians as somewhat hypocritical. There we go. Like every boy at a day at the beach is digging a hole. If they were trying to criticize Christians as hypocritical through her, then okay. Let's put it this way. Yes, she has become corrupted by the immortality of seeking vampirism, but most Christians would not be afraid of death, which is a weird thing to say.
No, it's not a weird thing at all. No, it's not weird, because if you're absolutely, convinced of your faith in as I suppose, I want to say, funny enough, that the priest in the Mist TV series was again, you've probably not seen it, so don't worry too much. But long story short, he believes that the Mist is an apocalyptic event, and rather than doubting himself or doubting his faith, he actually falls even deeper into it. So much so that he goes through a trial by ordeal, just to put his faith on the line, test his faith. I am completely with you. I don't find it strange that someone who is that who would have a belief that strong wouldn't fear death. If anything, they would embrace it because they know what's on the other side.
Yeah, well, there's a verse in Maccabees, which is a book that the Catholics salvaged from the editing out of the Bible, and there is a family of 7 brothers, and each one is consistently tortured, and it gets down to, I believe, the last one, and this tyrant king says, you know what, I'll chop off your hands and your tongue and everything, but if you renounce your belief in God, then I'll let you. And he just goes, no, it's all right, kill me, the last of my line, because I'm not afraid of being tortured and material present. I'm afraid of compromising my values and living a servile existence, because while I might expediently survive now, I'll live forever in heaven. And that is the kind of conviction you're dealing with. It's that Christianity is a bulwark against tyranny. That's why Marxism has always snuffed it out. And so it's a little difficult to believe that many people, even if they were provided miracles, would jump at the chance to drink the blood of a literal demon standing in front of them if they were properly devout Catholics.
There was one moment in particular I really wanted to ask you about, and it's when Pruitt and Riley are having the conversation after Riley's been turned, and Pruitt just openly says, tells him a story about when he convinced young Riley that he'd resurrected a mouse.
Oh yeah,
that Riley brought to him, and I viewed that as one of the more sort of insidious moments that I thought was very uncharitable. Sort of almost saying that effectively the priest is okay lying to you to get the numbers up in the pews. Yeah, I don't know if that's a very harsh reading of it, but
no, it's not. And he's isn't meant to do that. Of course, one of the commandments is "Thou shalt not bear false witness." But it also, I think that was more so in the script as a sort of wink and nod at he is displacing Christ as having the ability to resurrect the dead, and that's going to be his fatal flaw, which is that ultimately one of the things in the Book of Revelation is that even the human beings are meant to emulate God/Christ's example by carrying out the morality he set forth. You can't take his place and enact all of the plans for him because you're not capable of bringing about the resurrection. And even though he was in some way capable of resurrecting and healing wounds and the like, it came at the cost of literally selling his soul to a demon and everyone else's. So that willingness to make people feel better and take the Christly role did mean that he impeded on his priestly duties and adhering to biblical morality.
Do you want to know something funny about that scene when he's talking about the dead mouse? Excuse me. It actually reminded me of an experience I had when I was young, and it wasn't a mouse; it was a ladybird. So I had this ladybird in my hand, right, and it after about 30 seconds or so, it rolled over, lifeless, not moving, and I'm only a little kid, and I'm like, oh no. So I've gone to my mum, and she's like, oh no, it's gone. And I'm like, I don't want to put it down. And I remember this. I sort of put my hands together over it, sort of cupped it, and I said a little prayer for it. And then when I removed my hand, it turned around and it came back and it flew off. And yeah, it reminded me of that. But I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to find another ladybird to convince myself. Pruitt, that actually happened.
Nice. Well, we got a little bit over. Try as I might. You cover an interesting show. You're going to want to talk about it. This really could have been an EFAP challenging 20-hour spectacular if we'd gone through every single detail, but we try to be a little more focused on this one. I would only implore you to watch it if you have not. It'd be really weird for you if you have, because we have assumed just a whole load of knowledge on this one. But if you watched it already, I can assure you that even into the third rewatch, this is gold. I had the tears going. So I think at this point we should probably do a closing thoughts and scores. And yeah, we'll of course be using 12 burgers as a score. It's funny that number comes up a lot, as I heard an interesting character say. TCG, would you like to go first? Oh, also chat, get your scores in while you're at it.
If I could score this from episodes 1 to 5, I would have probably 1 to 4. I suppose I would have rated it quite highly. The second half of the series, the second half of the series did drop off quite hard for me. Just in terms of some of the decisions that they made and some of the holes that were left in this story. I mean, I definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested in Mike Flanagan's work. And if you've watched Bly Manor or The Haunting of Hill House, then definitely give Midnight Mass a go. But for me, I mean, a couple of the monologues were really dire, man. They really sort of drew me on. They droned on. But what I would say is the soliloquy from Erin, the first one, I'm absolutely spot on. The first one was wonderful. It actually didn't cry, but it hit me on a personal level. Whereas the second one that she did was just boring. I was quite invested in some of the conflicts that were going on in the show, in particular, with the father-son, the Islamic father and son, and the sort of like the battle between, potentially losing his son from Islam and Christianity. That intrigued me. The dynamic, I thought Bev was a great character, who spoke a lot of sense, even though she was supposed to be the baddie. Pruitt's acting, the character, just was wonderful. And I was really interested. I was really invested in Riley as well, up until they absolutely butchered his character and his decision making at the, I think it was episode 5, wasn't it? Yeah. From that moment when they took out Riley, I wasn't really as invested at that point, and so it did sort of drop a few burgers for me. In terms of score, I'm probably going to give it. I'd probably give it a 7.5. I'm sort of floating between 7 and 8, so I'm going to give it a 7.5. Sort of like a wonderful, beautiful, 5-star, Michelin star quality burger at the bottom half. But as you end it towards the top, it does start to resemble more of a McDonald's with extra gherkins, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Slightly off gherkin. It's that last minute flourish, isn't it?
Yeah.
Plenty of ketchup though.
Oh yeah, sure, why not?
All right. Connor, how about yourself? Closing thoughts and score?
Yes, I'm actually going to give it something very similar. Because we're doing 12 burgers, the magical number 12, I'm going to automatically knock one off for one of the apostles who strayed. So we're gonna automatically deduct it starting from 11. There was a bit of beyond meat in this burger lineup towards the end of the series, unfortunately. I did really appreciate quite a few of the performances. Quite a lot of the scripting was good for the first 4 episodes. Erin's soliloquy was beautiful. The cinematography, the scoring, and it's just a shame that the ending was dreadful. It was Weatherspoon's buttermilk chicken burger dreadful, and so I will have to go with say 7. Yeah, I'll go with 7 burgers. How about that?
I think
Yeah.
7 is pretty fair. I'm looking for. Oh, have I saved the relevant picture?
This is where Horrorshow comes in with a 10.
I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. I can't do it. I want to do it. I really do. Yeah, I think this is okay. I'm gonna be biased. I still lean much more towards Haunting of Hill House. I feel that emotional core of the family is so much stronger there, even though it also bungles the ending. It only bungles it in the very last episode, therefore, so much more of the series is not bungled. This, I like the personal connection. I like the ideas. Even though it's very front-loaded, I didn't feel I was being preached at like something from the early 2000s, which was nice, but I did become very aware of the limitations of the writer and the blind spots of it, which it's a shame. I felt that punches were pulled and there was some material in there which could have been so much more interesting if someone had sort of done the research and had the huevos to put it on screen. And then we just... I was just finding this a mature, engaging series with lots of character-based observations and subtle things to work out and notice, and that was working so well. It's just you get to the end of episode 5 where it does a big moment that your brain then starts to deconstruct, and if you let your brain keep going, then my gosh, episodes 6 and 7 do not end well for you. This is not even mentioning one interpretation, which is the sort of the protagonist going and then the group of people that take his place to bring down the church, which is not a reading that we have time for on this particular episode. But you can definitely read it that way if you want, and I know some people have.
There is
so
to that, I would agree.
Yeah, you can't get around that. It's hard to say it's accidental at this point, and yeah, I think it's. I really like this, but I haven't rushed to watch Flanagan's next series because I just kind of see him getting the treatment and doing more and more on message things. So we've covered some limitations of writing an idea and understanding, and we've covered that there are some absolutely terrible bungles in the plotting that ultimately the story relies on. So it's a last-minute fumble, but I like the emotions were so strong for me that I think I do still give it something like a 9. And I feel I'm probably being generous at that. I am biased in favour of something emotionally landing with me. Robert Longstreet, who played Joe Colley, absolutely got to shine in this. And on screen, we've still got Bev, played by Samantha Sloyan, who is doing the very sort of thankless work of being a smaller character in a lot of things. And now she actually gets to shine, and she does so much with it. And she's based in a way that the show didn't actually realise. So I can't help. I can justify my 9 based on those two alone, frankly. So yeah, 9.5 burgers, an impressive amount of ketchup, but I think possibly the mayo was plant-based.
Bruh.
And I did not consent. Think that's fair?
Says doesn't consent to the plant-based mayo, says the vegan.
I'm consistent. All right. I will. Oh, interesting. The NREAB, thank you very much. I was just seeing a super chat come through. I'll read your story out if that's okay. With £10, I appreciate that very much. My dog had my neighbour's rabbit dead in its drawers. I purchased an identical rabbit and placed it back in the hut. Next day, my neighbour was screaming. She said the rabbit had died 2 weeks ago. You had me there. Damn it, Enriab trolling me. Damn it, when we get troll comments. No, I appreciate the super chat very much. Thank you. Dr. Prepper, I mean, this is the kind of thing you run across. You watch The Haunting of Hill House and you notice that there are five siblings in the Crane family. And the only relationship which does not end in divorce is the one that does not have that characteristic. And it's just a little awkward when you notice it and you wonder who went out of their way to make that happen. It's a tricky topic that, oh gosh, that's a whole rabbit hole that we won't go down to. Oh dear, never mind. Sorry. That brings us to the end, I believe. We've done our closing thoughts and scores. So now you'll get the horror homework for next week. For episode 100, still on theme of Christian perspectives on horror, we are covering The Wicker Man from, is it 1973? Is it? I think it might be 1973. Anyway, look, The Wicker Man is famous enough. Just don't go for the Nick Cage version and you'll be fine. We'll be covering... Oh, gosh.
It is 1973. You're bang on. Wonderful.
So we'll be covering The Wicker Man from 1973, the most based pro-life horror film that no one noticed was pro-life. And we are covering it.
Can I just quickly point out before we finish that Harry has just appeared in the chat saying, have I missed this whole thing? Yeah, you're only 2.5 hours late, mate.
How did you do this? How, Harry? How? Well, since you're here, Harry, do your horror homework. Watch The Wicker Man before the 100th episode next week. And, Connor, do you consent to a new Rotsuki Doji episode, or are you keeping your purity?
Right, this is going to have to be explained to me because I don't know.
Do not Google that. Okay. Thank you for the $5, Jay. This is a family-friendly show. There is no way I can discuss that film on here. I'm going to have a hard enough time with Human Centipede when we get to that.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, Harry and I are going to have a difficult time covering Berserk in future, which we're now doing.
Interesting.
I'm Googling now.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, before TCG gets the results of that very unfortunate Google search, I'm going to get out of here. Thanks again, Jay and the NREB. Do your horror homework. Massive thank you to first-time guest Connor.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
It's an absolute joy having you on here. I'm so glad we got your perspective on this one. And also unexpectedly based standing up for Friday the 13th, Part 7. That is a true connoisseur's choice.
Other than the fact that her dad was entirely intact when he jumps out the river at the end, is a good film.
Yeah. And thank you also, TCG.
Pleasure as always.
All right. That is everything for this week, folks. It's going to be busy. We have a literature stream tomorrow. Amy and Waifu are coming on. They're going to do a reading of a Lovecraft essay and a Lovecraft story. I believe it is Dagon and not Cool Air as originally advertised. So that's going to be nice and cozy tomorrow evening. And I will be doing a short emergency stream on Scream 6 on Saturday. And then I'm going to be offline for a while because that's healthy. Sunday, I'll be in church. I'll leave it there. Thanks again, folks. All the best. Cheers.